To start reading more about Ivy in chapter 4 and 5 today in Echo. So they are just coming into town from their trip from La Colonia. "Look, Ivy, that must be your new school," said Mama. It was late afternoon and Papa had finally turned off the highway and down a long road that stretched toward the horizon. Orange trees on one side, lemon on the other. Papa slowed the truck through the small town and idled in front of a one-story, white stucco building with a sign that read, "Lincoln School." A cluster of palm trees anchored the front corners of the property. Manicured lawns surrounded the building. Manicured, if you get a manicure on your fingers, it's nicely trimmed. So that's what it means. The lawns were trimmed and looked good and were nice and neat. Geraniums filled the flower beds beneath the windows, and rose bushes, some of them blooming, lined the walkway and the front steps. "It is more green and pretty here, yes," said Papa, rolling down his window and leaning his elbow out. A citrusy smell perfumed the cab. Remember, we're not in a taxi cab. The cab is the front part of the truck, right? "Not so brown and gray like the valley in winter. A land of sunshine and flowers, even in December." Ivy couldn't argue about that. She read the sign taped across 2 classroom windows. "Fifth and sixth grades join the Lincoln Orchestra. Starts in January." "Orchestra?" said Ivy. None of her other schools had one. Even the word, like the school, felt beautiful and well kept. She imagined that most of the students who joined had already been taking music lessons and owned an instrument. Still, an orchestra. As Papa drove on, Ivy craned her head to look back at the playground. A blacktop area painted with 4 square grids, hopscotches, and a basketball hoop. Beyond was a grassy field with backstops for baseball and kickball. "Are you sure this is my school?" Papa reached forward and patted the large envelope on the dashboard. "Guillermo and Bertina sent the papers for Lincoln School, and that is what the sign says." He nudged her, grinning. Ivy could not help but smile too. Papa drove a few more miles and turned down a long dirt drive through the middle of an orange grove. "There!" He pointed ahead at an area cleared of trees where a wood plank house sat in the center. It had a front porch just wide enough for the 2 old rocking chairs waiting to be occupied. The barn doors on the garage did not quite meet in the middle, and the house and garage both needed a new coat of paint. But they were bigger and more welcoming than their bungalow in Fresno. They climbed from the truck, stretched, and walked around the property. The backyard was fenced with old pickets that could not make up their minds about which way to lean. In a swath of sun on the side of the house, 2 large T-shaped poles faced each other, with clotheslines strung between them. Iris plants, the leaves yellowed and brown, choked the flower beds. Papa took a handmade map from the envelope and studied it. Looking up, he pointed through the rows of orange trees on the same side of the road. "Through the grove, you can just see the owner's house in the distance." "Does he have children?" asked Ivy. "A boy a little older than Fernando, who is in the Marines, and 2 girls close to your age. But they're not here right now." Ivy felt her heart leap. At least there were girls her age. She hoped they could be friends. She knew she'd never be friends with anyone like she was with Araceli, but at least she'd have someone. "Will they be back soon, Papa? Are they on vacation? Will we go to school together?" Papa glanced at Mama but didn't answer. He busied himself untying Ivy's suitcase. As he handed it to her, she could sense there was something he wasn't telling her. But what? Before she could ask another question, Mama took her hand and led her to the house. They stepped inside a screened-in back porch. A washer with a round tub sat in a corner. An electrical cord dangled from its side and attached above it. The wringer, like 2 giant rolling pins, one on top of the other, waited to be fed wet laundry. Mama smiled. "We will not have to scrub the clothes in a metal tub. What a luxury." They walked into the house from room to room. "It has what we need. Table and chairs, beds, a sofa in the living room," said Mama, "and we have the rest in the truck. It is simple but clean. It feels like a home." It was true, and Ivy couldn't help but notice the lilt in Mama's voice. The lilt means like she was almost singing, like she was full of joy. Maybe coming here would make Mama happy, and she wouldn't worry so much about Fernando. As they walked, and she wouldn't worry so much about Fernando. So that's talking about Mama. As they continued to walk through the house, peeking into every room, Ivy felt her own spirits lift. They reached the smallest of the 3 bedrooms, which held a metal twin bed frame and mattress. The walls were covered with faded wallpaper of trailing green vines and tiny rose-colored buds. Mama said, "And this is your bedroom." Ivy looked at Mama. "My own?" She had always had to share with Fernando. She tried to imagine a room all to herself, without 2 twin beds crammed side by side, or a dresser crowded with Fernando's basketball trophies, or having to share the drawers and the closet. "But, Mama, don't you need a room for your sewing?" Mama smiled. "I will set up my machine in Fernando's bedroom until he comes home from the war. I think I will enjoy sewing next to all of his things." Papa appeared, carrying the small 3-drawer dresser. He positioned it against a wall and patted her on the shoulder. Before he left to unload, he grinned and said, "Didn't I tell you everything would be better?" Do you realize they weren't trying to be mean to her before? They were trying to do what was best for their family. And yes, she was having to miss out on something very important to her. But they needed to move, and that was the time they needed to move. Her parents are not bad or mean, but sometimes parents have to do things that are not going to make their children happy because they're thinking further ahead. Ivy walked around the room. She bounced on the mattress, checked inside the closet, and gazed out the bedroom window at the rows upon rows of orange trees that surrounded the house. She thought about her new school. She was tempted to believe Papa, especially with Mama humming in the kitchen and Papa whistling as he carried in boxes, sounding happier than they had in months. Ivy let a tiny bit of happiness creep into her heart, too. She'd never once, in all the places they'd lived, had a room of her own. She pulled the harmonica from her pocket and played the tune to the lyrics, "Sailing, sailing over the bounding main," and in her mind she traveled to her own little island, surrounded by a green, waxy-leafed ocean with golden, round-bellied fish bobbing in the waves. Okay, now we are going to read another chapter, but I want you to stop here and look at some of your questions. The last question for chapter 4 says, "Things start to look like they might be better as they drive into their new town and home. What things do Ivy and her mother get excited about?" Okay, so list some of the things that they saw either outside or at home that excited them, that were that made them think that things would be better. Ivy had already unpacked her clothes, hung Fernando's jacket in the closet, and placed the harmonica on the dresser alongside the instruction booklet when there was a knock on the front door. Had the owner's daughters returned home? Ivy ran to the door and opened it as Mama appeared behind her. A woman and a girl stood on the steps. The woman wore a Sunday dress, even though it was Thursday, a hat that looked like an upside-down rowboat, and a tweed coat. She held a stack of black fabric in her arms. The girl looked to be Ivy's age. She wore a matching blue coat and dress, and her hair was swept to the side and caught up in a blue bow. With her black hair, pale skin, and eyes the color of dark green leaves, she looked like a porcelain doll from a toy shop window. Behind them, a large Buick was parked in the drive. A burly man with short, sandy hair stood next to the driver's door. His hands were behind his back, elbows out, his feet planted apart like a soldier might stand. "Hello," said Mama. "Good afternoon. I'm Joyce Ward," said the woman, "and this is my daughter Susan. Are you—" She looked at a piece of paper in her hand. "Mrs. Lopez?" "Yes, I'm Luz Lopez," said Mama. "Bertina said you'd be arriving soon. We were just driving by on our way home from town and saw your truck, so we stopped. Did she write to you about the laundry and ironing?" "Oh, yes," said Mama. "Wednesdays I pick up the clothes and bring them back here. Fridays I bring them to your house and finish with the ironing." "That's right. And you are willing?" said Mrs. Ward. Mama nodded. "Of course. The address?" We're just down the road and around the corner on Blanchard Lane. It's the tall white house with the green roof. Our back fields connect, but it will be easier for you to drive around. I'm so relieved. I've been lost without Bertina. You see, I have arthritis and it's hard for me to lift an iron, and the clothes are piling up. I can stop by and pick up a few things before Wednesday if you like. Could you? Said Miss Ward. That would be a help. Mama smiled. Yes, of course, tomorrow afternoon. Ivy cleared her throat. Mama put a hand on Ivy's shoulder. This is my daughter Ivy. Our son Fernando is in the army. Ivy noticed Mrs. Ward's face grow tight. We will pray for his safety. Thank you, said Mama. I have a question. Ivy will go to the Lincoln School 5th grade. I need to turn in her papers tomorrow before she can start. Do you know where she will meet the bus? At the end of your drive, said Mrs. Ward. Susan gets picked up at 8 o'clock, and you would be the next stop. If you turn in her papers at the Bain office tomorrow, I imagine she can start on Monday. There's only one more week of school before Christmas vacation, but at least she can settle in. You probably saw the school on your way here. Susan took a step closer to Ivy and smiled. I'm in the 5th grade too. We'll see each other every day. Ivy smiled in return and nodded, relieved to have a familiar face on her first day. She'd never started a new school without Fernando by her side. I'll save you a seat on the bus, said Susan. Mrs. Ward passed the stack of black fabric to Mama. These are for you. My husband is retired military and is the chairman of the county CSO, the Civilian Safety Organization. They're blackout curtains for your windows. Everyone must use them after dark. So the Japanese can't see the west coast of America to bomb us, said Susan. One speck of light and their planes can see California. Ivy reached for Mama's hand and squeezed it. Were they in danger? Susan must have sensed her nervousness. Oh, don't worry, she said. My dad says we're perfectly safe as long as everyone uses the curtains. If you are interested, said Mrs. Ward, I volunteer for the Red Cross on Sunday afternoons, making bandages and wound dressings for the troops. We are always looking for volunteers. Mama nodded. I think that is something I would like very much. Mrs. Ward glanced back at the car and lowered her voice. And you are welcome to bring Ivy with you whenever you come to the house. It would be company for Susan. Susan's eyes grew larger. Promise to come tomorrow with your mom? Ivy nodded. Okay. Mrs. Ward glanced back again. Mr. Ward had begun to pace near the car. Why hadn't he come to the door to introduce himself? Mrs. Ward took Susan's hand. We better go. Ivy watched them walk down the drive. Mr. Ward walked around the front of the car to open the passenger door for his wife, then the back door for Susan. After they were inside, he shut the doors, put his hands on his hips, and gave one curt nod toward Mama and Ivy, frowning. As the car pulled away, Ivy said, Mama, Mr. Ward does not look very friendly. No, Mama agreed. He looks the opposite. But you cannot trust appearances. When someone wears a face like that, it is often hiding a reason we cannot see. Ivy watched the car disappear. What could Mr. Ward be hiding? Okay, your first question for Chapter 5 is what are the blackout curtains for? Okay, so blackout curtains were used during the war, and after dark, they weren't allowed to have any light shining. So they did have electricity in their houses, but they didn't want it shining because they thought that the Japanese planes could see where they were and could bomb them. If it looked dark, they couldn't tell the difference between the land and the ocean because California was right next to the ocean. So that's what the blackout curtains were for. Now, in your comment below, I want you to think, it said that she came in and she was so excited about the idea of having a washing machine that had ringers so that they wouldn't have to do it just in a tub on a scrub, on like it was called a washboard. Look around your house and think of something else that we have that they wouldn't have had yet. Something that would seem a luxury to them or that they wouldn't even have had at the time. Okay, so list something below that is a luxury in your house or something that you have that they probably would not have had. Okay.